Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Edward Dutton, also known as the Jolly Heretic, who is a prolific author and commentator. He's got a YouTube channel and he's got plenty of books that he's written. And in this conversation, we talk about his theories with regard to the genetic origins of the left and the right, and we take time to define what the left and the right is, or leftism and conservatism. And then we branch out from there to talk about varying ways in which the current political climate might resolve this way or that way and stabilize around ethnic lines, why that is worrisome, but also perhaps inevitable, and what we can do to facilitate an enlightened type of conservatism. And then we swerve into jolly banter of the sort I wish was a staple on this channel. Perhaps I can do some work on my own to get that verve going more often. But Edward Dutton's work and channels are down there in the description. If you appreciate this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the tip jars below. Without further ado, here is Edward Dutton. Sir Dutton.
Hello. I went for the black this time because you went for the black last time, and now you've gone for the realistic background.
Look at the memory on you. It's actually real. It's not just realistic.
Okay. That's where you live.
Yeah.
That's book and fairy light corner.
Yeah.
Oh,
Fairy
excellent.
lights, yeah. It's like the will-o'-the-wisps approaching the
Oh,
guest.
all right. Okay. Well, I got this black screen thing, you see, so I think
love it.
I'll keep using it.
That's good. It's really nice on you.
I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Jolly good. Right. Let's yes.
Yes.
Uh,
We spoke less than a year ago. I just looked it up. It was March 2023. The episode that we did together did very well. People were really excited to hear you off the cuff. Hear
Good.
your ideas. How has your work been going for you?
I've been, okay. I've been doing this. What have I done? I had, March last year. Oh God, I can't remember I had a book out, didn't I? Yes, on the Naked Classroom. I think that came out. Yes, the evolutionary psychology of your time at school. And then I've been working on this other book on wokeness, which I've just about finished, or I'll have finished soon. So is this actually the interview, or are we going to start formally, or what?
Yeah, it sounds like you want to start. It sounds like you're rearing to go.
Let's go. Yeah, let's go on with it. Let's go.
Enough with so wokeness. What tact are you doing? There's a lot of books on wokeness, lots of different ways of breaking it down. What's your lens or framework?
Um, I the main thing I've looked at in my book, Breeding the Human Herd, is I think that it can the change can significantly be understood in genetic terms. So I think that we can define wokeness. Wokeness is basically, as far as I can see, just the new word for social justice warrior, which is in turn, to some extent, the new word for just basically the far left, or the left wing individual. And as I probably said when I was last on this channel, the way I would understand it is that we have these five moral foundations because we are a pack animal. And in prehistory, we have to reach the top of the pack because it's the people at the top of the pack, particularly the men, who have access to resources and who pass on their genes. And so these moral foundations are to be group oriented. That is to say, obedience to authority, in-group loyalty, and sanctity versus disgust, because sanctity tends to sanctify as the will of God that which is good for the group, and it tends to taboo as disgusting that which is bad for the group, and that includes invaders who will bring in foreign diseases and things like this. So those are the group-oriented foundations. And then you have the individually oriented foundations of equality and harm avoidance. And these are good because as an individual, because obviously you want to ensure that you get your share of the pie, as it were, and also that you want to avoid harm to yourself. So these are the five moral foundations that we have, and we vary in these five moral foundations. Now, the evidence is that people that are conservative are about equal in all five moral foundations, and people that are liberal are very interested in the individually oriented foundations, but they're not particularly interested in the group oriented foundations. So you have then this split between the conservative and the liberal. Now, we know that conservatism correlate and also traditional religiosity correlates with genetically with mental health and with physical health. And we know that we were under harsh Darwinian selection pressure until about 1800, and the groups that tend to dominate in that regard were the ones that were the most group selected. That is to say, the highest in internal cooperation and the highest in, external violence or whatever. So it seems fairly, and religiosity itself correlates with conservatism very strongly at about 0.7, and religiosity itself seems to be adaptation. It's associated with mental health, physical health, fertility, and everything that would have been selected for. And so what we can say on that basis is that we were selecting for religiosity, we were selecting for conservatism under harsh Darwinian conditions. So with the collapse of those conditions, you would expect a build-up of mutational load. And the mutational load would the child mortality rate in 1800 was something like 40 or 50%. It's now 1%. So you would have a build of mutational load, and that mutational load would be of the body, but it would also be of the mind, because the brain, genes relating to the brain are about 84% of the genome. And so if you've got mutation of the body, you sure have damn it got mutation of the mind. It's a massive target for mutation.
And by mutation, are you saying specifically, or are you tying that or using that as a syndoche for dysfunction? Is that
yes, because we were so strongly, okay, there are some positive mutations, that's true, but we were so strongly evolved to our ecology, so finely evolved to it, that in general any mutation is going to be, statistically, it's going to be bad.
Okay.
And so it's going to make you less fit. And so what you would then see is a rise in mutation, and that mutation would generally be in the direction of less conservative, less religious. That's what you would predict to happen, because we were so conservative and so religious and under such harsh evolutionary conditions, and child mortality was so high. And so you would expect any deviation from that, although of course you're going to get deviations to some extent in a right-wing direction, that is true, but in general you would expect it to be in a left-wing direction. And consistent with that, people who are left-wing compared to people that are right-wing, and there's studies on this that I cited in my book, Breeding the Human Herd, are physically shorter, so they're less able to reach their phenotypic maximum height because they're using more of their genes to combat disease or whatever. They are more likely to die, they are more physically sick, they get over illness less well, the men are physically weaker in tests of strength, they are more likely to be mentally ill, they are more likely to be physically ill, their faces are more asymmetrical, and a symmetrical face is a sign of low mutational load, because if you can maintain a symmetrical phenotype, it implies good health. And there are many other examples of this as well. So I would think that that is the very, very fundamental thing. It's a build of mutational load, and therefore we were selecting to be more group oriented, more and more and more and more group oriented across time under these harsh conditions of group selection, where the group that is more ethnocentric destroys the other group. And in the weakening of that selection, we become more and more individualistic, more individualistically oriented, more concerned with the individually oriented moral foundations, and eventually a tipping point is reached. I suspect this happened in the 60s. Where until that time we were placed on a sort of an evolutionarily adaptive roadmap of life, which taught us to be group oriented, and we would competitively signal how group oriented we were and how conservative we were, and then some sort of tipping point I mean, a good example of this was the fact that between the 30s and the 70s, it was routine for children that were illegitimate to be put up for adoption because it was considered so unacceptable to have an illegitimate child because it was a sign of sexual inconstancy and goodness knows what, right? So we're extreme like that. At its most extreme, actually, in the 50s in a lot of ways, where, for example, homosexuality was more unacceptable in the 50s than the 30s. And then some sort of tipping point was reached, probably in the I would put it down to 1963. I always see that as a tipping point. Sex came rather late for me in 1963, somewhere between the end of the Chatterley Band and the Beatles' first LP. And there's some poem by Philip Larkin. And so then we flip over. So that I think is what's happened. And Congress, with that, if you look at what we were selecting for, being conservative is associated with being agreeable, it's associated with being conscientious, it's associated with low mental instability, whereas being liberal is associated with the opposite: low agreeableness, low conscientiousness, high mental instability, and being individually oriented sort of personality disorders as well, Machiavellianism and narcissism, which are themselves associated with mental instability. So that, I think, it's a fundamental genetic change. And then once that genetic change happens, then it becomes a cultural issue. It becomes a runaway cultural issue. People that are intelligent, notice the way the wind's blowing. They have the effortful control to force themselves to conform to the dominant dispensation. They do so. They competitively signal it. And so then intelligence plus probably an element of neuroticism, and you get this runaway leftism, and that's roughly how I'd explain what's happened.
So one of the things that defines wokeness, from my point of view, is purity spirals, is a hyperfixation on group identity. So there's this odd, when you talk about the moral foundations, where the conservative has like an equal, it has loyalty and purity balanced against other things. But if you look at the runaway left, they suppress their purity disgust vector, but then it pops out and they start to eradicate anybody who's less pure than them. They're hyperfixated on collectivism and groupism. So it's oddly the case that wokeness does have those moral foundations, but they're runaway. It's
very interesting. There's an interesting nuance there. So when Jonathan Haidt and colleagues looked at this, what they did was, as with a lot of personality traits and so on, you get a number of sort of very narrow traits, and you find that they intercorrelate. And so then you get a larger trait, a factor analyzed into a larger trait, and so on and so on and so on. And so overall, the left are lower in disgust than the right, but the left are specifically higher in moral disgust. So they are less disgusted by disease. They are seemingly, although that there is some nuance there as well.
Well, if you look at their rituals, like Pride Month, let's say, like just the disgust reflex is suppressed to such an extent that you have very disgusting behavior.
No, in it, they're just
celebrated.
There's two ways of looking at that. So with the first thing, with the disgust, I think that they are higher in moral disgust. So what's going on there? Well, one way of looking at disgust is that it's a group adaptive trait where you keep foreigners basically out of the group because foreigners are vectors of novel diseases that can be bad for you. It's horrible to say it, but there is some truth in that.
Well, and include genetic mutations that make you less.
That's also true. That's also true that if you are adapted to your environment and you marry out, then the gene complexes which render you adapted to the environment may break up. And so your children will be less healthy. And this is one of the reasons why cousin marriage seems to correlate with the level of pathogen load in the environment. Because if you have high pathogen load, you have to be strongly adapted to those pathogens, and therefore you have to marry people like you to make sure that the genetic complexes don't break up. And so so this all makes sense. So if we think about what is the evolutionary strategy of the conservative is to be a loyal member of the group and that, and if they die for the group, they die for the group. But that's kind of that's their strategy. That's not the strategy of the leftist. The leftist is not as loyal to the group. The leftist strategy is an individualistic strategy whereby and it's a strategy which is useful if you are at the bottom of the group. So if you are, what is leftism about? It's basically about virtue signaling, about equality and harm avoidance.
Yeah, it's not so much group loyalty as groupishness.
Right. So it's exactly, it's a nuanced thing. So being left wing is defined by being interested in the equality, harm avoidance, that sort of thing. And anti-traditionalism to some extent as well, which is interesting. Then if you're at the bottom of the group, if you're at the bottom of the pile, it's in your interests to want more equality, because then you get more, and it's in your interests to want so you fear a fair fight, you're anxious, anxiety. And if you're physically weak, which we know on average left-wing people are compared to right-wing people, then you kind of fear a fair fight. And so the way that you will play for status will be covert. You covertly play for status. And how do you covertly play for status? Well, you virtue signal about harm avoidance and equality. Secondly, the thing which is keeping you in your place, which is a problem for you, is the traditions of the society. That's under that system, you are at the bottom. So it makes sense that you would want to upend those and challenge those. So leftists tend to be anti-traditionalist. And also, if you are high in neuroticism, which they tend to be, then you're going to be full of resentment and loathing and whatever, and therefore you're going to just hate the traditions that are in place and want to bring about a sense of chaos and disorder, because traditions are about order and structure. Bring down anything structured, and then in that chaos take power. I think that's more what you're talking about with Pride Month than a matter of low disgust. Maybe part of it's low disgust, but I think it's also just creating disgust in the population, dysphoria, challenging all structures that are traditional, bringing down the system, which you as a person that perpetually sees yourself as disempowered. Because if you're high in neuroticism, that's possibly how you will see yourself. You see the world as a dangerous, unpleasant place. It's frightening, it's awful. And so this makes you high in Machiavellianism. You want to control the world, you want to be in charge of it. And so you play for power. But if you at some point just say, okay, well, I've got power, I'm fine, well, then somebody else will overpower you. So you always have to feel that you don't have power. So you always have to be against the current structures and so forth and challenge them. So you've got the equality, you've got the virtue signaling about equality, harm avoidance, you've got the anti-traditionalism. And the final thing, and I think this is highly relevant to the disgust element, is that the moral circle of leftists, there's a study on this, is different from that of conservatives. So conservatives tend to or sort of bond with people, as it were, or identify with people in terms of genetic distance from self. It's as though they're at the center of the universe, and there's a series of concentric circles broadly surrounding self. That it's your family, and then it's your kin, and then it's your ethnic group, and then it's your race, and then it's your species, like that. Whereas the leftist moral circle is quite different. The leftist moral circle will maybe be more concerned about another ethnic group than their own ethnic group, or another class than their own class, or another race than their own race, or in extreme cases, another species than their own species, which is taking it into a bit of a maladaptive direction. But what that means is that they can collaborate with outsiders because they identify with them and they bond with them. So one strategy as an individualist that you can use to take power is to collaborate with outsiders to take power over your own group. And that's what you see leftists do again and again and again. So a lot of upper class English left-wing people are collaborating with the English working class to gain power over basically the upper class, and therefore society. And so it's those three things, I think. It's the virtue signaling, equality and harm avoidance, it's the anti-structure, anti-traditionalism, and it's the collaboration. And that collaboration then means that you have a different sense of disgust. So that your community, to the extent that you have one, is based around believing in the same ideas. It's not based around being of the same ethnic group or the same family or whatever. And so people that don't have the same ideas as you are therefore outsiders and will should are dangerous and are questioning that which is giving you your power and therefore need to be shunned.
So if you look at the country of Britain and you see what's happening now with the influx, well, even America, this massive influx of outsiders, or, well, America's different, but let's just say Britain. There's a huge immigration going on. The elite are siding with the immigrants, so the people that are coming in, and against the working class. One would suppose in order to break rightward for Britain, the upper class and the working class would have to form a bloc. The people who are lower in the totem, there still has to be some sort of hierarchy that's based on a broad, lower class, right? So how would the right re-engineer itself or revitalize itself if it doesn't collaborate across groups, just on a class level?
Well, that's true. But then on the other hand, the distinction there is that what you have with the left is you have basically Machiavellian liberals or leftists or whatever you want to call them, who are collaborating with foreigners who are a different ethnic group, who are obviously much more distant genetically from them than the English working class are from the English upper class. So even though you could say, okay, you could even argue that the English upper class, the traditional English upper class, are doing something which is in their genetic, it's in their genetic interests to collaborate with the English working class over foreigners. So what I was talking about was examples of people who institute policies which damage the English upper class and their interests.
Okay.
But so I mean, to give an example of this, in a lot of Eastern European countries have these awakenings in the 19th century. Finland does, Estonia does, whatever. But the people that write the literature involved are never of the peasant group that you think of. The Finnish national awakening was led by upper class Finland Swedes, the Swedes being the upper class in Finland, who basically identified with the Finns. And in doing so, took power and influence within Finnish society, but damaged the influence in Finnish society of the Swedish-speaking population. So that was kind of like treason. And you get that again and again and again. Likewise in Estonia, the people that were the Estonian national awakening, it was the German upper class collaborating for their own individual interests against the interest of the Germans in Estonia, who've now been completely gone. And with the Estonians, and you get this again and again and again. Even with the rise of socialism in the UK, you see this. I'm saying that to the extent that there is this bloc movement happening in the UK, you're going to see the conservative middle class and upper class collaborating with the working class because it's in both their interests. In an evolutionary sense. And what the left are doing, and this is what's got them in trouble, is they are collaborating with some sort of middle class virtue signalers, plus Muslims and other groups that just don't, and homosexuals and that don't particularly like each other. So it's quite a fragile coalition. Yeah. And the Gaza war has put that into sharp relief, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, what has been your opinion insofar as YouTube will allow us to publish this episode about the influence of the Gaza war on the left, the state of the left, and these coalitions, these very fragile coalitions, multicultural coalitions?
To the extent that YouTube will let us, this is a bit difficult. You might have to cut this. Or
I really wanted to challenge you, Edward.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. No one calls me Edward. My Auntie Ethel called me Edward.
I'm sorry.
But,
Professor.
Anyway, but Ed, it's a little, I can't comment on America because you don't have the same Muslim percentage, I think, as we do in the UK. It's not as big they're not as big an influence yet. But it has, and it's currently causing problems because it's as we speak this week, last week. Because it's put everything into sharp relief. It takes sometimes that problems are bubbling under the surface and people are talking about them and people kind of instinctively understand that they're there but it takes something to bring it to a head. And the Gaza crisis has done it, because it has revealed that we have a significant proportion of the Muslim population that are basically sympathetic to Hamas, which obviously is a terrorist organization which killed 1,400 people on October the 7th and whatever. So, and they are sympathetic to Hamas, and they are sympathetic to the idea that Israel shouldn't exist as a state, and they march through London every week, chanting openly slogans that are hostile to Jews, and whatever. They are sympathizers. And 65%, I believe I'm right in saying, of non-whites in the UK vote Labour. And it might be something like 70% of Muslims vote Labour. And so they are very important to Labour's coalition, Labour's power coalition. And then it's also brought into sharp relief the fact that a lot of people that are leading supporters of the Labour Party who are white, you have to make a virtue signalling decision. If you're left wing, you need to virtue signal, because you're high in neuroticism, you feel negative feelings strongly, you're high in anxiety, you feel terrible about yourself, and you have to deal with that. How do you deal with that? Well, you create a kind of vulnerable, narcissistic false self, where you tell yourself that you are morally superior to everybody else and you're better than everybody else. How do you do that in a society where the moral foundations that we've been pushing towards for a long time now are equality and harm avoidance? Well, you are more in favor of equality and harm avoidance than everybody else. And in the Israel-Palestine split, the way that they see it is that, well, Israel is the one with the power, Israel's associated with money, Israel's associated with America, Israel is whatever, and so we should be on the side of the disempowered. Who are the disempowered? It's the Palestinians. And that's been the case for a long time. And so it has compelled a lot of people on the left to show their true colors, which is that in this context, they are basically sympathetic to murdering terrorist organization. So this is a problem of optics for the Labour Party. So you've got these Muslims, you've got obviously you've got these people, which becomes a problem of optics within the party. And then it's interfered with the political system in the UK, because as a few weeks ago, the Scottish National Party wanted to hold a vote on whether there should be a ceasefire. And it was quite obvious that if that vote went through, the Labour members would have to vote on it. And if they did vote on it, then it would send a message to every Muslim in their constituency, if they didn't vote for a ceasefire, to not vote for them, and potentially they would lose the seat. And if they voted for a ceasefire, well, then they're anti-Israel, they're anti-Semitic, they're terrorist sympathizers. So they basically can't win.
Yeah.
That's the situation they've got themselves into. And the speaker interfered disgracefully, a Labour speaker, to stop that happening, saying, so there was no vote, saying that, it's because MPs are subject to threats from outside. And that in itself is telling you what a problem is going on, is that these people are turning up at the houses of members of parliament and threatening them and saying, we know where you live and we know where your children live and stuff like this, so vote the way we want. I mean, that's how bad it is now in the UK. So it's buggered the left up, basically. And then the other day, George Galloway won this seat in
Could you give me a little context on George Galloway? Because I'm a total outsider here.
George Galloway was I'm sorry, I keep forgetting you're one of those Americans. George Galloway was a Labour member of Parliament, interesting middle class background, Labour, from Dundee in central Scotland, and he was a Labour MP from 1987 till the time of the Iraq War. When he was so against the Iraq War and so critical of Tony Blair, so this is about 2003, that he was thrown out of the Labour Party. He then stood in 2005 election in Bethnal Green and Bow, which was this very Muslim seat, on anti-war, anti-Iraq ticket, and won, defeated the Labour member of Parliament, Una King. He then was elected. He then stood down, and he was elected again in Bradford West, which is again a very Muslim area. And then stood down, and then he was elected again the other day in Rochdale. Now, in that constituency, interestingly, in the Muslim areas, the vote was overwhelmingly, like 95% for Galloway. And in the white areas, it was overwhelmingly for this independent that came second. And it was a white man. And it was a rejection completely. The Conservative Party came third. The Labour Party, who disavowed their own candidate for saying that the Israelis had let October the 7th happen, came fourth. And then the next day, the British Prime Minister, who of course is an Indian, went on television and basically condemned extremism, both of the far left, i.e. Galloway, the Islamism, as he called it, and the far right. Now, it's not. There's no. What's he saying by this? Basically, I think the concern is that enough people will vote for a party called the Reform, because the Conservative Party have been in power for 14 years and they've done bugger all to reverse Labour's policies. I mean, immigration is as high now as it was under New Labour. They've done nothing. Nothing. And so the concern is that people will vote for the Reform Party, which is the Nigel Farage party, and the Muslims and whatever will vote for Galloway and independents, and it will create a very, very complicated political environment. And so therefore, it's almost like he was defining extremism as voting for anything that is not Labour or Conservative. Yeah. And it's almost like a desperate measure from a
I love how they use democracy. Like you're voting wrong. You're destroying democracy by voting wrong. I love that.
He was expressing concern about democracy. This is a man who was parachuted into a seat in North Yorkshire that he has had nothing to do with, mainly because he was Asian, as far as I can work out, because that was the policy of the Conservative Party at the time, to promote more ethnic minorities. Then he stood to be leader of the Conservative Party against Liz Truss and lost. And then there was a palace coup, and he was just imposed. So he's never been elected leader of the Conservative Party. He's never been elected prime minister. He's never won an election. So no, it's a very interesting and tense situation in the UK, and it's almost this idea that democracy is on the line is obviously not true. But what is true is that those that are invested in the status quo, i.e. the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, they're in trouble because the Labour Party could lose because of the way we have the same system you have in America of first past the post. So because of the way that votes are concentrated, a few Muslims, voting for an Islamist candidate will not necessarily mean that the Islamist wins, but it could throw up weird results, weird unexpected results. And likewise, so that's the situation in the UK. So that's the kind of person Galloway is a left-wing firebrand, basically, as far as I can see, an individualist who identifies with a group other than his own, and that is Muslims and Palestinians and so forth. But I have to say, he's charismatic. He's an extremely eloquent speaker. I've seen him speak live this was about 2001 at the Durham Union Society, and then I chatted to him afterwards in the Union Society, and he's incredibly magnetic speaker. It's quite extraordinary powers that he has.
So one of the interesting things about the left is that somehow you have this phenomena of like Queers for Palestine is probably the apogee of, or the zenith maybe, of this completely farcical self contradiction where the Labour or the left is tied together the Islamists or the Muslims and the LGBT, and they advance both of them insofar as they are both underrepresented or marginalized, right? But that can't hold. Eventually, the Islamists will, it's just a fact of nature, outbreed the LGBTQ set and take over. And they are not at all tolerant. Their moral foundations are very conservative.
Absolutely not. This is what I look at in my book, The Past is the Future Country, The Coming Conservative Demographic Revolution. But we look at it based on American data. But we're quite clear that eventually the left will not, there will be very few white left-wing people. Because white left-wing people aren't breeding, and the heritability of political viewpoint is maybe 0.7 or whatever. So you get a period of these mutants where they're these leftists, where they're able to survive and breed a little bit and whatever. But they don't. The conditions permit them to carry on. But eventually they remove themselves from the gene pool. It could even be argued
just genetically or also mimetically. Will these ideas fade
Well, it
out?
could be both. Could be both. Could be so you could have a situation where you're getting into it. So
Okay.
you can get the idea that they're doing so genetically. So the ones that are very, very left wing, that's likely to be for genetic reasons. These are people that would be left wing in all circumstances, even in a right wing society. And then you're going to get a lot of people that are left wing because, particularly intelligent people, because that's the thing, that's the in thing to be, that's the fashionable thing to be, that's the high status thing to be. Those people are probably going to have higher fertility than the extreme leftists. And those people, mimetically, if society became conservative again, if it flipped back, if you have this tipping point of 20% being highly conservative and we flip back, those people will flip back to conservatism. So that's mimetically. So there's two possibilities. I mean, I would just see. I'm writing a book at the moment called Woke Eugenics, in which I argue that what wokeness is basically doing is it is attacking. It is getting people and putting them on the evolutionarily maladaptive roadmap of life. It's saying, don't have children, don't pass on your genes, be ashamed to be white, be ashamed to be male, have operations so you can't have children. It's putting you on a maladaptive roadmap of feel depressed, feel despair, there's no God, there's no meaning. It's putting you on a maladaptive roadmap of life, which is a selection event, really, such that the only people that can survive that are going to be those that are genetically prone to be resistant to wokeness, i.e. those that are, for genetic reasons, very strongly conservative and very strongly ethnocentric and very strongly religious. And so basically, it's wokeness is from the perspective of a person as a nationalist, would be a eugenic event. These people are altruistic mutants. They are helping to make the remnant European population group oriented, and genetically healthy and mentally stable, and right wing. That's what they're doing. They're selflessly sacrificing their own genes to do that. But there's an environmental component to it, obviously, to anything like this. And to that extent, you're going to get some people who will be left wing, will in some circumstances, and right wing in others. And so that's the process that's being followed, and they will always be interested in the and so eventually you'll be in a situation where the only left-wing people in America will be basically what you might call the foreign right, i.e. people that would be right-wing in their own country, but it's good to be left-wing in abroad because that's undermining the system and they're the ones at the bottom and whatever. And so so then they will just throw LGBT to the wolves. They won't be interested in them at all. It's a totally unsustainable coalition. But that's the thing. If you identify with the person that is oppressed, then the people that are all oppressed, except the white working class, because they've managed to somehow convince themselves that they're not oppressed. But anyway, they're bored of them.
Yeah, right.
But then they don't necessarily like each other, and this is very clearly the case with the LGBT and Muslims.
Is there, this is maybe, I had the thought, is there the possibility of an enlightened conservatism? Is there the possibility of a return to, let's say, quote unquote, race realism, or just the admission that ethnocentrism is desirable and good and not a bad thing in and of itself? Is it possible for that to reawaken and be enshrined in the West without it leading to internecine ethnic conflict? Can there be such a thing as a white identity or white pride without that necessarily becoming group versus group conflict? Because one of the fears that people have of the conservatives, and this might be a psyop in and of itself. A couple weeks ago on Twitter, 3 or 4 weeks ago on Twitter, there was this huge debate around Starship Troopers, and there was just, the left has a hard time seeing order as anything other than fascist. And they identified more with the bugs or the aliens than they do with the humans that are ordering themselves to preserve themselves. So I'm wondering, when you kind of tease these ideas about ethnicity, about eugenics, that in the popular imagination, it snaps people back to, well, it's genocide. White people being proud and ethnocentric is equal to genocide, or it leads to genocide. And if it's going to be the case that ethnic consciousness is reawakened, or enshrined, or at least respected in the elite of Western? Will that
I think it's
necessarily?
gradually. I mean, what you get with this runaway individualism, this runaway leftism, because there's asymmetrical empathy between the conservative and the liberal. The conservative is concerned about all five moral foundations. The liberal is only concerned about two. So there's asymmetrical empathy, and things tend to move in a liberal direction until you get up to a point of serious problems. You get what Robert Henderson's called luxury beliefs among liberals, where they can believe these things because they don't affect them, and they'll carry on believing them until they do affect them. And then when they come up against a serious problem, like a war or a massive plague, then there tends to be a reaction against it. And what you've seen, even since we last spoke a year ago or so, is that war being come up against. So, for example, the army in both the UK and America can't reach its recruitment targets. And it can't do that because it's spent the last 30 years, or 15 years anyway, telling white people how dreadful and awful they are and how guilty they should be, and showing images of black people and women and gays and whatever, and anything except the kind of people that actually are the backbone of the army, which is white working class men. And it's come up against a problem. And then also you've got to where people are just losing faith in the political system, both in the UK and America, and just seeing it as corrupt and not worth bothering about and not worth preserving and so on. It's just gone too far.
Openly malicious towards them.
Openly see it as openly malicious, and therefore wokeism in this very unsubtle way. It's not like the Prince of Bel-Air, 1990s subtly saying to you, yeah, black and white are the same, let's all be friends, is it? It's bashing you over the head, saying you white people are evil and you're ghastly and you're dreadful, and the George Floyd riots and the intimidation there and all this sort of stuff. And so I think that they've realized it's a problem. And there's a colleague of mine, academic agent, friend of mine, who's talked about how they're evidence that they're winding woke back in, that they're trying to, and he's shown some examples of this in advertising and so on, that, there's a few white people in the adverts and things like this because they are concerned about how far it's gone. It's like the magisterial Reformation versus the popular Reformation. The popular Reformation was great for these nobles that wanted to destroy the power of the Catholic Church, but eventually it got completely out of control, and it was threatening them. And they had to therefore sort of rein it back in. And so you have this movement towards the magisterial Reformation. And I think you've got a similar situation now where it's just gone too far, such that you've got people now, quite prominent people, quite blue-pilled or whatever you want to call it, people in the UK saying basically multiculturalism has failed. Multiculturalism is a bad thing. They won't say multiracialism, that's going too far, but multiculturalism, they'll say that. And that was unsayable 15 years ago. You couldn't say that. It was this dogma, multiculturalism is inherently good, the multicultural society that we all value. And now some of those same people are saying, it's fine to have lots of race. I don't know where they think culture comes from. I don't know if they think that God just throws cultures down to certain areas like thunderbolts. I mean, I don't know if they understand that there's a genetic component to culture. But anyway, putting that aside, multiculturalism is a bad thing. And that was something that was just unsayable. And so we're moving, there's a shift back and a perception that it's gone too far. Whether you could have an idea of being white, I'm not so sure about that, but certainly in being English and things like that, and being British, and not in being British in some ridiculous, vague way to do with values that every country has.
Yeah.
But in the way that Americans, if you're Irish American or you're Italian American, you're proud of your blood, your ancestors. In that way, it may well be allowed to develop. Yeah, I'm not sure about white, but the groups within it, perhaps.
There's this idea of Christian nationalism on the right in America that's kind of a very spongy concept and stuff. But I'm wondering your thoughts on an overarching ideology that can contain multiple ethnic groups in order for internecine ethnic conflict to not be the law of the land. Is that the inevitability that there's going to be conflict? Can there be a live and let live multiracialism that's tied together by Christianity or Islam or something like that?
No, my suspicion is that what we are I can just go on the data, and the data from America indicates that what we are breeding for is conservative, ethnocentric, among whites, among the more intelligent whites, and those are the people that take over the culture. is conservative, ethnocentric fundamentalists. That's what we're breeding for. So it's not, we're breeding for people that are going to be highly ethnocentric. Now, they might not be openly ethnocentric. In fact, historically, they don't tend to be, do they? They often tend to dress up
They don't need to be.
They don't need to be, but also there is a tendency to dress up your campaigning for your genetic, ethnic, racial, whatever interests in religion. And so the conflict between the Irish and the English, they talk about, oh, well, it's the Catholics and the Protestants. But in reality, if you look at the data, the Protestants are mainly genetically Scottish and English, and the Catholics are genetically mainly Irish. It's actually an ethnic conflict. Even the conflict of the Civil War in England was essentially a conflict between Western England, which was Anglo-Celtic essentially, and Eastern England, which was just English. And the American Civil War was a replaying of exactly the same thing. And ultimately, because the southern states, they were from the west of England, they were the Celto-Saxon Cline. The northern states, they were from the east of England, they were the Anglo-Saxons. It was the same fight replayed, but it was dressed up as something else. It was a fight about in England. It was a fight between Puritanism and a more Anglican kind of Christianity. And in America, it was a fight over certain other social issues. That's what it was dressed up as. But ultimately, you could see it as an ethnic fight. So you would expect if there was a conflict like that, it would be dressed up as religious. And there's a degree to which that's happening. There's a degree to which they'll talk about Christian, Judeo-Christian values or whatever, and that's what's important to us, and Islam's the problem. But ultimately, that's just, I think, a gloss for South Asians and Arabs versus European people. But it's dressed up in these kinds of religious terms. A, because it's so taboo to talk about openly about ethnic interests and so forth. And B, because often religion is more stirring for people. It makes it the will of God. It makes it more profound. Right. And so you have that element to it, which is useful. Well,
and you can wash your hands of the animalistic aspect of
exactly. And it's almost like, that's a good point. You can wash your hands of the animalistic aspect. You can tell yourself, I'm not just being animalistic. Oh no, this is for something greater. This is for the glory of God, or this is for the glory of Allah, or whatever. And so therefore you make yourself seem superior, but in reality, no, you're fighting for your genetic interests, and that's that.
What do you think of what could be the glue or the harmonizing system between different ethnic groups in the era that we're in, with technology, with travel? And the environment is completely different. You can be born one place and then end up in another. There's so much mixing going on. What is it that allows for people to coexist without genocide, without constant ethnic conflict? Is that ideology? Is that wealth? Okay, so it's economic. I'm looking for a solution here.
There's a number of ways you can look at that. So if I look at the research on religion, then our sort of evolutionary match, if you like, is to be with people that are our family, that are our kin, that are our tribe, that are genetically similar to us, and to know them personally. And once we move, whether it's a chicken and egg situation, this would have been a gradual thing. But once we move into larger polities, where you're dealing with strangers, then you start to get the development of moral gods. And the idea is that if this person believes in the same God as me, then he can be trusted. So he can be trusted. So I can cooperate with him. And it's very interesting that change happens. You get these big gods. You move from everyone worshipping some little local god, and you see this in the Old Testament. There's this emphasis on worshipping Yahweh, not the house gods, not the other gods. We should all worship Yahweh and no other god. Because it's a way of unifying the people and promoting social trust and promoting positive ethnocentrism and whatever. So one religion that's the way you do it. Now, it seems that if the polity gets too big and genetic differences are too large in the polity and whatever, then you start to get subgroups and breakaways and whatever, you know. I mean, for example, you can see this within England and within areas of England. Anglicanism, dominant religion, but you look in Scotland, nope, Calvinist. You look in Wales, they're mainly nonconformist, Methodist, things like that. Cornwall, again, Methodist. Ireland, Catholic. Some of the islands off Scotland, Catholic. And so it's a way of expressing sort of separate identity and whatever again. But so that's one possibility. Is that what holds you together? Therefore, is the same religion and believing in the same things. But that can obviously only go so far. That could only, it seems, deal with only so much genetic difference. And once the genetic differences are substantial, i.e., that you really are dealing with separate ethnic groups, not separate tribes, but separate ethnic, a bigger difference, then we start to see that these cleavages, these problems. So Wales is religiously very distinct from England, and different parts of England are religiously distinct, as I said earlier. So that can only go so far. And I think a big part of it is wealth. If people feel that they have enough resources and they feel they have roughly equal kinds of resources, then you don't get resentment, and then you know you're fine. Now then a problem comes if the two groups are unequal. Now that's interesting. There's not much conflict in the UK between Hindus and white people. And I think that the big reason for that is that their IQ there is about the same. Their average social status is about the same. There's nothing to have a conflict about. Whereas the problem with white people and Muslims is that is twofold. One, they are socioeconomically much lower than whites on average. And two, therefore, they are in working class areas of England where the people are only just themselves getting along and feel that they're neglected and whatever, and therefore see correctly foreigners competing with them and whatever, and see them as a danger. Whereas I don't think there is that perception with Hindus really, and also Hindus are basically a reasonably good minority. They don't really demand anything. They don't get upset. You know, they don't burn books or well, there's no problems there. So that's the difference. So if maybe it works, and one of the things I look at in my book, The Past, Future Country, I suspect there will be a sort of breakup within these countries, and I suspect you will get groups that will, as it were, white align. And I think the Hindus will do that, and intelligent black people as well. And so I think that there could be some overarching means via which basically people who are more intelligent and who are conservative unite together and break away from the sort of leftist induced chaos, and that could potentially cross racial lines. Yeah. I don't know quite how you do it. I mean, I was at this conference, ARC, which was where there was people of all different races and whatever, and all of them were all saying the same thing. There was black people there, Australian Aboriginals there. If you're a conservative, there is a feeling that something is deeply wrong, and you're united by that. And the fact that, you know, you might be a Christian fundamentalist and you might be an atheist and you might want Scotland to be independent from Britain and you might want... None of this matters. We're all united by this feeling that something's very wrong with the world, and we have to come together to do something about it. And so maybe that's that sense of dysphoria, which was what united all of us, and also a belief in free speech and free inquiry is something that could be worked on.
What is that general problem that everybody's feeling? Is there a name for it?
Well, I think it's if I was to put it in the psychological terms, it's that, as I said earlier, we have these 5 moral foundations, and to be happy, we have to feel that they are all attended to. And if you are a conservative, then, well, they're not attended to. We are in a situation of extreme individualism, where all we go on about is equality and harm avoidance, and the other 3 things are not attended to, are neglected. And so it makes us feel unhappy. It makes us feel a sense of dysphoria. If you are high in disgust sensitivity, which you are if you are a conservative, then you look around and you see all these bloody ugly buildings. Why are they there? They're there because left-wing people have taken over the society, and left-wing people are anti-traditionalist and anti-structure, and beauty is tradition and is structure and is order and so therefore they're against beauty and they put up ugly things, and these make you feel dysphoric. Or even things like I'm afraid most people there's evidence, a lot of evidence for this, that if you are confronted with photographs of people of a different of your own race who are strangers, it does not set off the most primitive part of the brain, the amygdala, the fear part of the brain. If they're photographs of people of a different race and they're strangers, it does. So that's a fundamental evolved difference. Now you can say we should try and get over that and whatever, and we should suppress
Do you
it.
think so?
Well, I don't know, but I'm just saying that's how it makes people
Yeah.
feel. That's the point. And so they're going to be unhappy. And so there's a general dysphoria, a general feeling that it's not right, that something's wrong. And that's what I think unites a lot of people that are concerned, and increasingly so, because it's so extreme now and so in your face. And I mean, the thing that when it really crossed a line for me is that they can't even make realistic history films anymore. And I've always hated historical inaccuracy in films, always. Always, and I think it should be illegal.
Oh, you got to love Gemini, don't you?
Right. Well, exactly. That's interesting. That was what Andrew Doyle called what was the term he used? A wokeness moment. That these things that have happened really quite recently have made a lot of people realize just how appalling it is. They've gone too far. And Google realized they went too far, and they knew they were going to go too far, but it's almost like they didn't care. It's almost hubris. They went too far with that. The idea that if you show me a founding father and they show you a black man or whatever it was, it's like blasphemous. It's lying, and they've gone too far. And there are so many other examples of that that you literally can't. I mean, there's this film out at the moment in Finland called how would you translate it? Maya's Storm Island or something, and it's set in 1854, and it's when the British invaded Åland, which is this island off Finland. And it's as historically accurate as it could be, i.e. there aren't black people in it, because there aren't gays in it, and there aren't women in positions of power, and you aren't being got at. It's just historically accurate. Now, you can't make a mainstream film like that in the UK anymore. You can't. You'd have to have some, even just as extras, black people or whatever, as medieval knights. It's just there to get at you, and it undermines the purity and veracity of the art. So there is this feeling that things have gone too far, and there is, I think, slowly a reaction against it. And as we were saying earlier, I think this is October the 7th may well be a turning point in this, because of the way in which it has confronted us with what these people are really about, which is that they are so instrumentalist. They are prepared to support terrorism. That's the kind of people they are.
Mm-hmm. What is the proper either action or reaction? Or not just proper, but the potential. Where do you find potential moves forward in the direction of the good?
As opposed to people reacting to what's happening, you mean? I mean, that's the difference. That's the difference between the right and the left, though, isn't it? That the evidence is that people that are conservative are broadly happy with the world and happy with life, and people that are liberal and neurotic and unhappy with life, and a big motivator for doing.
They're the change agents,
right? A big motivator for doing the conservative, the average conservative. He just wants to use the cliche. He just wants to grill. He just wants to enjoy his life and not have to really do anything. And it's the people that are unhappy on some level that do things. The genius is unhappy. He has psychopathic traits and he has neurotic traits, and therefore he wants to understand the world desperately and he innovates new things and whatever. The poet is unhappy, very high in mental illness, and therefore he wants to express the depths of his feelings and make sense of his world and, sort of comprehend what's going on to ward off suicide or whatever. And likewise, all these, and so that's why there is a tendency for the people that innovate change to be unhappy, and therefore left wing. But you do get some people that are change agents towards the right, I suppose, if they are very high in the group oriented foundations and very low in the individually oriented foundations. And these are the people like Bismarck or whatever, these charismatic right-wing types, charismatic nationalist types, and it will often be in a time of warfare, a time of conflict with another group, or a time of national humiliation. That they will come to the fore, and where things are just chaos, have degenerated into just chaos, and they will come in and fix it and say, let's fix the chaos. People perhaps like Margaret Thatcher. So I think you'd have to, and that was economic chaos. We don't, if we were to have some serious economic chaos that was seriously affecting people. I mean, you've got to remember, in England in the 70s, everybody was on strike. Bodies weren't buried. Streets was full of rats. There were power cuts. Food was through the roof. I mean, we're not. It's difficult to get to that. We're so wealthy that it's difficult to get back to that level, even of the 70s. But it would have to be a level where people are so take the view that what they're dealing with is such chaos and it's so appalling, and just you can't live with this. Then you would get some right-wing reaction, and you may be slowly getting it. And also, the more complex system is, the more fragile it is, and so the more unpredictable things can go wrong. But I would think it would have to be some serious. I mean, look at what's happened where you have serious economic chaos, then you often get a right-wing reaction, or where you have serious social chaos, then you get a right-wing reaction. And you see that in South America. You've seen that in Argentina. It's absolute chaos. So you get this economic chaos, social chaos. El Salvador is a very good example. It wasn't so much economic chaos as social chaos, full of crime everywhere. So you get this guy that comes in and he basically says, get everybody that looks like they're a gang member and put them in prison. And that's what they've done in El Salvador. And the murder rate has collapsed from the highest in the world, essentially, to about the same as a sort of poor European country like Albania in a couple of years, because they've basically got all the young thuggish men and jailed them. And so he's just come in and sorted it out, because it just got too ridiculous in El Salvador. So it would have to be something like that. Can wokeness and just this sense of insanity due to wokeness bring us to a feeling of that level of chaos? Possibly, if it results in just so much of an awareness of corruption, like Claudia Gay, so much of an awareness that wokeness has made things just totally unfair and insane and dangerous. And that we've had cases of airlines that have openly appointed people on woke grounds, and then the door blows off.
Yeah.
We've had all kinds of things like this. And so I think that could be that danger. It's a real danger, promoting people that are just promoted because they're black or they're women and not because they're good at their job. It could be, that could potentially be enough to bring about it. That would be the kind of thing that would be needed for a resurgence, like something really serious like that.
Should and can the arts lead in a cultural revolution towards the right?
The arts. I mean, it's very difficult, because it is basically people that are deeply unhappy that get involved in the arts, and people
and high in openness, longing for difference, mixing and matching different traditions.
Openness is just a bad construct, and really it's just a synonym for being left wing. I suppose you do get some right wing. I have a left wing
mind,
but not very many. I mean, it's. I suppose what you can say is that increasingly in the arts, it's just bad art. So increasingly now, a poem doesn't get published because it's a good poem. It gets published because it's a voice of somebody. So it's a poem by a black person or a gay person or a disabled person, and so we'll publish the poetry on those grounds. An extreme example of this, I can tell you, is in comedy in the UK. So there's like a rule, if you're a comedian and you want to be on a TV panel show or whatever in the UK, or be involved, there has to be basically a certain number of women, a certain number of non-whites, and those people will not be as funny as the white men. I mean, they haven't got there because they're funny. They've got there because they're non-white, or they're a woman or whatever. And the most extreme example is this woman, what's her name, Rosie Jones, and she's got cerebral palsy. Well, so have I, but she's got severe cerebral palsy, so she can barely speak. And they just put her on, and she just talks. And they just want her to laugh. They want her to be funny, but she's obviously not funny. It would be cruel to do an impression of her, but I mean, she speaks in a elongated, slurred manner. It's not her fault. And they put her, and so it's just bad art. And then you get people that are genuinely talented sort of relegated to the second division, as it were, obscure places, online or whatever. And so that's what's happening. So I don't see. I can't see
that's a selection event, though, right?
A selection event. Well, in that they.
I mean, or something like that. If all the best are relegated to somewhere else, there's not going to stop being funny. That's another selection pressure to even be more funny.
That's true. That's true. If somewhere, as is increasingly happening, like Oxford and Cambridge bring in woke selection policies, so the best people don't get in, then eventually people realise that the prestige moves elsewhere. Yeah. So you're quite right about that. So in that sense, perhaps there is a future for right wing in the arts, in so much, or not so much right wing, but just like what was left wing 30 years ago. Those kinds of people, that they're actually talented, and so prestige moves to where they are. So I suppose that could happen, and I guess there is a degree to which, if we focus on comedy, comedy has always been about challenging the Shakespearean court jester. It's always been about challenging power, about puncturing the pomposity of power, that sort of thing. Well, these people that you have in these panel shows now, they're not challenging power. That's the problem with wokeness. Wokeness never understands that it is power. That's the brilliance of left-wing conservatives when they were in power. They honestly, they were in power. We were in power. Yeah, we're in charge with the establishment. Fine, but they're not now. But yet, because the woke will still make out that it's these posh English people that smoke pipes and wear top hats, that from 50 years ago or something, that are in charge. And of course they're not. It's the radicals of the 60s that are in charge, but they never perceive themselves as in charge, which is brilliant, because if you're Machiavellian, you should never perceive yourself as in charge. You should never rest on your laurels. You should always think that you're fighting, that the Tsar's enemies might come back and take over. The Tsar's spies are around in the Soviet Union. And so I think that you're right in that sense, that increasingly what they produce, let's say, in comedy is not funny. These people are regime comedians. These who just, as I think it was Graham Linehan that used that, or was it Nick Dixon that came up with that, regime comedians, who are there to sort of give bread and circuses to the woke masses and make them pat themselves on the back. And the actual genuinely comedic thing to do is to challenge power, and the power is wokeness. And the evidence for that is that people are deliberately wanting to find ways of being part of the grievance hierarchy. They are wanting to find ways to, as it were, symbolically disempower themselves, which is showing you that the real power is with wokeness. So, for example, there's a case in America at the moment of a guy who, he's Hispanic, but he wants to be registered as Arab American. Why? Because if you're Arab American, you're definitely not white, and there's certain benefits to it. There's what you call transmaxing. Yeah. So you get these homosexual men or whatever that decide, well, I'm going to be a woman because it's better being a woman. There's benefits to being a woman, or the notion, obviously, to some transsexualism, transracialism, whatever. Rachel Dolezal. There's benefits to being of an oppressed race. And so that's showing you that they really are in power. So it may well be the case. That's a good point. That hopefully prestige will move with these people gradually to different places.
How far back in time do you have to go to be considered left-wing?
Me?
Yeah. The 90s? 1950?
Yeah, I suppose maybe this... probably earlier than that. Maybe the 50s. I'd have some quite left-wing views. I don't think homosexuality should be illegal. So that would have been a left-wing view in the 50s. So
I bring that up because it's an interesting question, because I think everybody would think about that and then say, well, eventually you're going to be considered left-wing, but that also brings into relief that there are when we talk about progress from our point of view right now, not all of it's bad. And when we talk against progress, we have to be selective about what we are speaking against, right?
Yes, that is true. One of the problems that we who I don't know if you see yourself as a conservative commentator. You give me the impression that you are. Um, is that there are those of us like me and perhaps like you that just don't like being told what to do
Yeah.
and will bristle against whatever is the power structure, and whatever is the dogmatic thing and whatever is telling us what we can and can't say. And so when I was at my boys' Catholic school, then I was, really anti-religion and whatever, because that was the power structure that was the to some extent dogmatic people, that I was reacting against. And then by the time I was in my early 20s, I realized, no, this is people that have power, these proto-woke people, these leftists, and that's they're the ones telling you what you can and can't say. They're the ones that are suppressing the truth. They're the ones that I will react against. And then there's people like that, and a lot of us that are influencers or whatever the word is, are, I think, of that kind. And such that if we were in, I don't know, Nazi Germany, we'd probably be quite critical of the Nazis. But then there are those that are conservative that would be no, they just are conservative, and they would be in those circumstances very pro-Nazi.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of distinction. That's the line that I draw, and that's why, as I said in the past is a future country, this conservative reaction, which I predict based on the data is likely to occur among white people, is not necessarily, it's not going to be paradise. It's not necessarily going to be an amazingly good thing. Yes, it's not. Let me show. I mean, there's this poem, a very good poet. I recommend him. He's American, a British poet called Philip Larkin, and he wrote this poem called let me see if I can, called High Windows, and it was written in the sort of 60s when there were massive changes happening in British society, and there was an awareness that the old system was falling apart, and a new sort of left-wing system was coming into place. And there's this nostalgia. So he says, when I see a couple of kids and guess he's fucking her and she's taking pills or wearing a diaphragm, I know this is paradise. Everyone old has dreamed of this all their lives. Bonds and gestures pushed to one side like an outdated combine harvester, and everyone young going down the long slide to happiness endlessly. And I wonder if anyone looked at me 40 years back and thought, that'll be the life. No God anymore, or sweating in the dark about hell and that, or having to hide what we think of the priest. He and all his lot will have gone down the long slide like free bloody birds. And then he's nostalgic for it is immediately, rather than words, comes the thought of high windows, the sun-comprehending glass, and beyond it the deep blue air that shows nothing and is nowhere and is endless. So he's nostalgic for the good part of the more religious society, you see.
Yes.
And I think that we would experience the same thing. We would be in this new conservative society nostalgic.
Yeah.
But remember when you could just sort of go to a club and randomly talk to a girl and get off with her and go back to her place and have sex. Can't do that anymore, because it would be more like a kind of white Iran, a white Taliban. And so there would be some poet of the time that would write a poem like that, where he'd say, "Oh, when I see them, listening to classical music and not having tattoos and not swearing and being married, I know this is paradise." And a bit scared in the dark and that of what you think about the LGBT and their lot have gone down the long slide. But suddenly I look up and I think of the noise of a disco and of music about sex and that.
Cocaine in the bathrooms.
Cocaine and freedom to take drugs and whatever and that's what it would be like.
Would you rather your grandchildren live in that or in this?
Well, the evidence is that people have higher subjective happiness in their evolutionary match, and our evolutionary match does seem to be rather more what a conservative society produces than what a liberal society does. I mean, the levels of subjective happiness among the Amish are around about that of sort of CEOs of large companies. I mean, these people are very happy. Now, that
Hmm.
could be a selection effect, i.e., the people that aren't happy just leave. But there's evidence that they are decreasingly doing so. So it's like a 90% retention rate. This idea that, oh, you go on Room Springer and you leave. No, they tend not to. They tend
I
to.
mean, yeah, Rumspringa is, the devil's got much bigger, drastic playground than he did 10, 15 years ago when they pop out of the Amish territory into this world.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe they 20 years ago they were like, yeah, okay, I'll go in here. Whereas now they're like, this is awful.
Yeah.
I don't. They all learned to drive, though. I was talking to some of them when I was in America in the summer. Not all of them go on Rumspringa either. That seems to be a myth. So there's different old order Amish groups, and some of them go on Rumspringa and some of them don't. But they all seem to learn to drive. That's the one thing they want to do: learn to
Hmm.
drive.
Hmm.
Useful for their farm, and
Hmm.
then useful to get
Yeah.
work with the English
Yeah.
and then come back in. But I think it's getting that balance right, which is difficult. I've often thought that there was, in some ways, a really good balance in the 80s when the conservative society was on the slide and the liberal society hadn't
There
become
was
dominant.
tension.
There was tension, and so then the 80s was this creative time where you got the old society being questioned, but you haven't got the dogmas of the new society suppressing ideas yet. There's this perfect balance of freedom, of structure and anti-structure, of order and
Mm.
disorder that I think
Mm.
might have existed in that I don't know how old you are, but I'm the very end of Generation X.
Same. Yeah.
And there was that, there was that, I knew the time before the internet.
Yeah.
Intimately, and I think that was a time of great creativity. And then since the year 2000, actually, there's been this massive rise in literary texts of feelings words and a fall in thinking words, in analytical words. And
Mm.
around about the 80s, 90s, it was sort of neither one thing nor the other. So I think that
What's
was
a
an interesting.
thinking word as opposed
Well,
to? It's,
like,
it's not just
analyze,
jargon. It's okay.
examine,
Okay. Yeah.
as opposed to feel and love and
Yeah.
words to do with feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
There was a video that you released. It was one of your most recent videos, and you spoke about conservatives. I'm butchering it because you just filled my head up with a bunch of things, but conservatives being adapted to a more stable environment and the leftists more adapted to a chaotic environment. And so they breed faster. They don't think long term and stuff like that. Do you recall this? I was just wondering about the conservative memeplex or meme pool in the internet age when everything is so fast, when the news cycle is going so fast. How does a conservative frame of mind that's long suffering, thinking longer, not so
Impulsive.
impulsive, develop and nurture itself within such a radical environment as we see now?
That's a very interesting point. I suppose conservatism is associated with conscientiousness, and that's associated with not becoming addicted. One of the things I've researched with a group of colleagues from Saudi Arabia is internet addiction.
Yes.
And so I would think that people that are the big predictor of addiction is low conscientiousness. So I think that conservatives, in that sense, they are less likely to become addicted to the internet, and to social media. Also, the thing that predicts becoming addicted to social media is narcissism, and this is higher on the left than the right. And so I would think that they're better able in that way to cope with some of the adverse dimensions of the internet environment. You're right that they are less able to cope with sudden change. And on average, conservatives are higher in conscientious. That means they're more rule following and they're basically more averse to really any kind of change. So that will be a problem for them in that way. But then there are other sides that they'll cope with better. So I don't know if that sort of equals out.
Mm.
But in terms of that, they won't like the change of it and whatever, but they also will perhaps use it less because they are less addicted to it, and so therefore
Mm.
the rush of it will be less obviously severe or less of a less constant.
Mm.
But I mean, the internet has been a huge boon for conservatism in this
Yes.
context, really, because before if you had a runaway leftist society like this, you didn't have the internet, then they'd have complete control, total and utter control of the entire narrative. Whereas now, of course, they don't. And you've had this movement against, in some ways, even things that in the 90s we accepted. Everyone accepted multiculturalism in the 90s. It was the world of Daria. It was the world of where you were edgy. You remember Daria? Well, you remember Daria? You're a bit younger than me, aren't you? I don't know if you remember
I think
Daria.
I'm a bit older than you, but where's
Well, what year
Daria?
were you born in?
76?
Oh, you're 4 years older than me. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it was after your time. Maybe you were probably at university by then. But Daria was this sort of miserable, grumpy
Oh, it's the
woman.
cartoon with the
Yeah, the
glasses.
cartoon. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, with the
Okay.
glasses. That's the one. Who was sort of cynical about everything and
Yeah.
whatever.
Beavis
And
and
that was
Butthead
how.
spinoff or
That's
sideshow.
exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly
Okay.
it. Beavis Butthead Spittle. And that was the way we were supposed to think at the time. There was nothing to worry about. There was no
Yeah.
activism yet.
You're over
Something
it.
had collapsed.
Yeah. Too
It was
cool
a,
for cool.
Too cool, cool. We forget how wonderful that time was, but there was only one narrative because there was television and that was it, really. Okay, there was
Yeah.
cable TV, but and the internet has allowed the right to fight back, and that's why I think, of course, they had this cliche, but that's why they had to control it. I mean, once Trump got in or Brexit happened, then they realized, oh my God, this is serious, and we need to clamp down on this.
And we'll see how
So
long that even lasts, because it seems like
well,
they can't even control it
they can't
correctly.
even control it. No, but that's what they should have known, though. I mean, I, as a person that hate, you were asking about how conservatives cope with change. I, as a person that hates change, resisted the internet for as long as I could. So I started university in 1999, and I would check my emails once a week, and otherwise I just wouldn't use the internet. And then I did my doctorate, and then I checked my emails once a day, but otherwise didn't use the internet at all. And I only started using it when I came to Finland because in those days, no YouTube yet, really. But I just was missing things from England. So I found that there was BBC Radio or whatever, and I could listen to it over the internet. And that's how I started using it. So I basically didn't use it for the whole of my degree and my postgraduate. I didn't use the internet. I just didn't use it. And I eventually was sucked into it, using the internet. And I would have thought it would be obvious to people. I mean, look at the revolution that was caused by printing, like absolute revolution caused by that new technology, which meant that ideas and people that couldn't previously have a voice had a voice,
Yeah.
radical people, basically, unhappy people, Luther, and people who couldn't previously find that information could find that information. And it had enormous consequences, i.e., it meant that people that were much less intelligent had much more knowledge. That's kind of what it meant to some extent. To some extent, to some extent. That's a simplification, but to some extent it meant that. And that's what they were concerned about. Then they started saying, oh my God, no, we can't have everybody having a Bible in their home. And so then they brought in a rule in England that nobody below the rank of gentleman, i.e., the lowest rank of the upper class, could own a Bible in English because they were concerned that these uneducated,
How did that work out for England?
literate farmers could come up with all kinds of radical ideas about Jesus saying that you should be on the side of the poor and God knows what. And so and it always happens like that. And then once you have the Industrial Revolution, of course, then it's even more for printing and whatever and distribution, huge changes. Anybody could have known that the rise of the internet would result in enormous changes that you couldn't stop, that the rise of social media would do the same, and that the rise of AI, which we're seeing only the beginnings of now.
Yeah.
Someone I know was doing their master's thesis today and was looking at someone else's master's thesis. And that person, I mean, it's incredible that person had cited, blah, 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 citation, ChatGPT. As though, I don't know how they were allowed to get away with that, but as though ChatGPT is just the oracle of knowledge.
Well, yeah, but they treat Wikipedia like that, which is
Well, it's
probably
insane.
no less or better, than Chat GPT.
They've no business doing that. But it's gonna have huge consequences. This potentially it could mean that anyone that's like a low level computer programmer is out of work. A lot of people that are translators and whatever out of work. It could lead to a situation where the whole middle class, a lot of the middle class, unless they're highly creative and original, are just out, and you just get people that do things that they AI, like plumbers and electricians and whatever, people like that. And then the really creative types and so on. It could cause the death of universities, as parents increasingly realise it's completely ridiculous to send a child to university.
Would that make you sad if the
No,
university?
it would make me happy.
Yeah,
I've always said that universities should be limited to the top 10% of school leavers every year. And then they are. Look at what it's done. We know there was a study the other day which found that the average IQ of American graduates is 102. And the woke were so unhappy about this because a big part of their self-esteem is that they have qualifications and things that they managed to pressure the editor of the journal, Frontiers in Psychology, to have the paper withdrawn on the grounds that it used demeaning language. So yeah, but 102. Now I think that's probably. I mean, that was a meta-analysis, and you've got to remember that some colleges in America, are so rubbish that they're basically teaching the equivalent of high school. So that's probably a bit low. But it's more likely. Let's say 107 is the average IQ of a graduate. But even then, it's not elite. And so this idea that you had, oh well, you go to university and you can be part of the elite, that's dead. And clearly. There's no point going to a mediocre crap university.
When everybody's elite, nobody is.
Exactly. When everybody's somebody, no one's anybody. And so the result of that should be, hopefully, that people realize this and stop spending thousands and thousands of dollars every year on these useless degrees. I don't know if you've seen this program, Love is Blind. It's on Netflix, and it's these people.
I thought you were going to bring it up. I was going to wonder if you're going to bring this up. Can you tell the audience what you're bringing up?
Why do you think I'd bring it up?
I don't know, because I was going to bring it up, but now you're bringing it up.
Well, let's talk about. I think it's amazing. I don't think that, like, chaps watching. I don't think any other series of Love Is Blind is worth watching, but this one is. Like, this one's really interesting, and it's got people in it that are mental. But I was going to say, so Love Is Blind is they're sitting in these pods and they go on dates and they can't see each other. Okay, so and then they have to get married.
Okay, there's this other one about Down syndrome dating show. That's a different show.
I've not seen that. Is that on Netflix?
Yeah. It's actually really heartwarming, but like it's kind of cringy, the idea. I don't know. I think there's clips of it floating around. I don't know where it's from, but
I've seen one called Love on the Spectrum, where they get people that are autistic and they try and set them up on dates. And sometimes it's with normies, sometimes it's with other autistics, and sometimes it's with people that have Down syndrome, which I think is a bit odd to do that. But anyway, what I was going to make was that there was this woman in the current Love Is Blind, and she's an air hostess. And she said she never went to university, and she said she was the only air hostess that she knows that's never been to college. I'm like, what is the point of an air hostess having a degree? Why?
Good conversation.
You went to university and you got a degree in something, and then you became an air hostess. What is the bloody point? Why not just leave school and become an air hostess? But it tells you the level of credentialism and just general waste and silliness. Like, it's absolutely pointless to have a degree and be an air hostess. And hopefully people would increasingly understand that. But I don't know why you thought I was going to mention Love Is Blind, but it is interesting because there's a character in it that very obviously has borderline personality disorder. And it's...
Wait, is this like a reality TV-ish kind of thing?
I can't believe you haven't seen Love Is Blind on... Have you not got Netflix? My wife gets it. Obviously, I don't pay for it. But
by definition, you do pay for it, but...
in that way, yeah. But if your wife... It's really... This current series only... of Netflix of Love Is Blind is really worth watching. I'm really looking forward to the next episode, which comes out at the end of the week, I think.
I really enjoy like the conversation taking a turn into your guilty pleasure, like what kind of trash you ingest. That's so adorable. It's so human of you.
But you get borderline personality disorder is fascinating. It's a very, very interesting disorder. It means that you have this fundamental fear of abandonment. And so then on the one hand, you fear being rejected, but because you've had inconsistent parenting and things like this, you associate love with being abused, basically, and being rejected and hurt. And so you also have engulfment anxiety, where so if the relationship gets too close, then you fear that the person will abandon you, so you preempt the abandonment, or you fear that somehow, because you're so close, that they'll find out the truth about you and they'll abandon you, and so therefore you remove from them. And then there's this cycle, and people that have it, they feel incredibly intense feelings, and so they can sort of split, so that they will deal with their intense negative feelings about the world and everything by finding someone who they think will save them from themselves. They idealize this person is going to make my life better, this person's going to make me happy, everything's going to be okay, and then eventually that person will disappoint them, and then they will split, and they will think this person's upset me, and then they will catastrophize, therefore they're evil, therefore they hate me, therefore I hate them, and they'll be horrible to them and paranoid about them, and then they'll calm down, and then they'll say, and then it'll carry on again. Like, and this woman in this has that, and she's like a really obvious example of someone that has that. And the guy that's married, that's with her, he is an example of the kind of person that's just really kind guy, really nice, tolerant person. Who gets sucked in by someone like that, and she's going to just ruin his life. And
so there's no hope for him. He can't save her, or
well, what they're basically doing is they're outsourcing their emotions to the other person. They're saying, my emotions are so overwhelming, I can't deal with them, so you look after my emotions for me, and therefore, if you upset me, that's kind of your fault.
Yeah.
And so she's so jealous of him. He goes out with his friends, and she says, I can't cope with this, and therefore I want to break up. And then the next day she's really sorry and whatever, and then it just happens again and again and again. It's fascinating, it's really, really worth watching. And there's another interesting character in it. There's this black woman, and she's obviously used to sort of wide boys and people who are full of shit, and then she starts dating blind this autistic. And he's really genuine and so on. He's a really genuine, because he's autistic, clearly, or has autistic traits anyway. And he's a really genuine guy. And so he just goes in, and this woman starts talking. Oh, well, I think I really like this. And he just goes, oh, and just walks out. Just leaves her talking. And he's absolutely brutally blunt. And okay, I'm bored of you. I want to leave now. And he somehow clicks with this black girl. And because she's obviously just so unused to this, she's just so used to these bullshitters. And I don't want to spoil what happens to people.
This does sound like a good show.
It's really interesting. This series is really, really interesting. Yeah, and the idea is love is blind. Of course, it's not, because then when we know it's not. I mean, a lot of love is based around genetic similarity. There's probably a degree to which you can assess that from voice, from things that you can't see in these pods. There probably is a degree to which you can do that, but there's a degree to which you can't. And so this then comes to light later when all the people that are in it, including those that didn't get married or didn't get engaged, meet up. So it is a guilty pleasure. Yeah, wow. It's very interesting. When my wife said, "Should we watch this thing, Love Is Blind?" And I was, and I've watched a few series of it, but this series. This is really, really, wow. It's really,
wow. It's got the Edward Dutton stamp of approval.
It has. Really, I do recommend watching the current series of Love Is Blind.
So what is going on with your channel and your writing? You got what do you do? A book a year about average?
Well, yeah. So I'm writing woke eugenics at the moment, and I'm just this idea, as I said, that woke is a selection event, and that's got a publisher, and so I probably finished that.
Nice.
April. And then send it off, and that'll probably come out in the autumn. And then I've got this book I'm doing on ancient civilizations, which should be interesting, but I'm working on that.
It's like aliens?
No, I'd like it to be, but no. I mean, I've looked at the moment. I'm skeptical, to be honest. I'm thinking no, but my co-author is much more convinced that there might be have been an ancient civilization, and is so anyway. It's an ongoing project. It's been doing it for a couple of years, and then there's one I'm doing on the evolution of religion. I've been doing that for about 7 years, and I don't know when we'll get that out with my co-author. And so that's books. And then I've got a book that I wrote exclusively for Germans. That's in German. I don't know when that will come out.
Are you just trying to awaken the Germans to?
That was the idea. That was somebody funded me to write this book, and then there's actually another book that I might start writing that someone wants me to do. I should message him tomorrow actually. Anyway, yeah. So that's that. And then papers. I've been doing papers on what parts of America are becoming more intelligent and less intelligent. What parts of Europe are becoming more intelligent, less intelligent. Things like that. And then the channel, it's expanded. There's people working with me now. You may have noticed a certain change in quality. I've got this black screen, but this isn't actually. I haven't actually painted my cellar black. It's actually I'm kayfabe here. I'm giving away the. But it's black. And so I've been doing in-person interviews with various people and whatever, and going to England every couple of months in that regard. And so the channel's got a Substack, jollyheretic.com, where I put a lot of stuff I can't put on here. You should get one. You can put stuff there that you can't put here. You see.
Yeah.
And then you can get support. People can send you donations and things. So there's my Substack, jollyheretic.com, and then so I've been doing that, and then yeah. So basically, the big change is into making sort of movies, and this movie I'm making about America
Like
and stuff.
documentaries, or kind of
Documentary.
like a Borat kind of documentary, or like a
Yeah, well, no one's compared
David
me to Borat.
Attenborough. Look at the fat American eating the hot dog.
Attenborough. Yeah, I've been compared to Sir Kenneth Clarke. I don't know if you've heard of him. And I've been
It's ringing
compared
a bell.
to a guy called Keith Floyd, who was a celebrity chef in the 90s. So apparently I'm a combination of Sir Kenneth Clarke and Keith Floyd. So I've been doing those, and got one on well, various things. I won't give it away. So yeah, so that's just carrying on really, and interviewing interesting and noteworthy sort of people. And the channel seems to be, I don't know, people seem to like it. So that's pretty much the situation.
Oh,
And
good.
I see you've been doing the same. You've had Nathan Coffness on here. I mean, he's
Yeah, I
Cambridge's
just had
most.
him on.
I
Yeah,
mean, they're trying to destroy him. I mean,
yeah, they're
there's
going
like
after him
a
hard.
new article about him every week.
Yeah, even the
Um,
conservatives hate
Even
him.
the conservatives. He's
Have you gotten that treatment for your ideas? Because the people do not like, even the conservatives do not like talking about demographic differences.
they they don't in public. So one of the things that I have
Yes.
found is that a lot of them will say to me, at conferences or whatever, behind the scenes that they know, they agree with me and they know that I'm correct and that this is fascinating stuff. But for it to be presented, even something like intelligence decline and its importance,
Mm.
for it to be presented to the public, is there some way we could sort of sugar pill it? Or is there some way we could connect it to something else or whatever? So a lot of them are. I don't want to call them cowards because there's a place in the world for purple pilled Peterson types that
Mm.
don't quite go there. It's that they move the Overton window, and that's important, so that eventually these kinds of things can be more freely discussed. Um, yeah, not publicly. Yeah, you have to be careful about that. And I guess a big part of it is just um, how you how you present it, and do you to what extent you're very careful about how you put it.
Yeah.
But it's almost like
Do you
as long as
fear tar and feathering, or have you experienced, other than like algorithmic suppression, like social ramifications for
well,
your
I
candid?
think a lot of us have experienced situations. I don't know whether you have, where you've been at a party or something, and there's some woke person, and you're getting along perfectly fine, and you say something which is indicative to them that you're not woke, not even that
Mm.
you're right wing but that you're just not woke, and they will just shun you. That's that. And it's very, and they will change, and their eyes will change very quickly and very dramatically, and suddenly they just realize you're a bad person, and they have to get away from you. And a part of that, I think, is neuroticism that you're invoking, and you are. They are so inculcated with this idea that anything that challenges their ideas is bad. Their sense of moral superiority is based around their sense of coping with their life. Is based around their sense of moral superiority. By challenging their morality system, you are challenging their sense of moral superiority. You are therefore presenting them with the scared, unhappy person that is beneath the woke hood, to put it in American terms, and therefore
Hmm.
they might be overwhelmed by negative emotions,
Yeah.
and that can go so far in people that are particularly mentally ill that they can be so overwhelmed by negative emotions that they kill themselves.
Has
So
that happened during a party when you
no one
when
has
you
committed
reveal
suicide
your
at a party
non-woke?
that I've no one has committed
Okay. You haven't
suicide at a
driven
party
anybody that far.
I've been at. No, and the other thing that they will do is in the good old days, if you disagreed with somebody in a pub, then you'd say, okay, outside you, and you'd settle
Yeah.
it with fisticuffs in a gentlemanly fashion. What happened to me the other day was quite interesting. I was in a pub and I was explaining to these people about sexual differences in sexual selection. So the idea that women select for status, and men select for looks. And so I said something like, if you think about it, all men are like kind of like people that use prostitutes, aren't they? I mean, they're basically resources. They're resources for sex. That's what they're doing. And women are sex resources. They're like prostitutes. That's I thought that was a reasonable parallel. And then it seemed this upset this woke person, this woke man, so much that he went to the bar and informed the barmaid that I'd said that all women are whores. And the barmaid then asked me to leave the pub.
He told on you?
Yeah, and in that way as well, not in what I said, like in his exaggerated way. And the barmaid said that you had said that all women are whores. I want you to leave the pub. Okay. So they grasp. They're like little children.
Yeah.
That aren't used to. And that's not the first time that's happened either. They will go to the teacher because they're brought up in an environment. Remember, this the longhouse. It's known as this completely feminized environment.
Yeah.
Where your dad will say to you, someone's hit you, someone's picking on you, fight back. It's like that episode of South Park where Stan gets served, danced at by a group of kids from out there. They break dance at him. Mm-hmm. And he goes home and says, and Sharon says to Randy, Stan got served today. And I go, what did you do? Fight back? And he goes, no, I went and told Mum. You did the right thing. You did the right thing. Well, that's crap, Sharon. If someone serves you, you've got to dance back, or they think you're weak. And then he insists on teaching him how to dance and all this stuff. And so it's like that. Your dad will tell you to fight back. Your mum will say tell the teacher. And in a society that's dominated by women, it's all tell the teacher. A lot of these schools in the UK don't even have playtime now because playtime might result in bullying. So they're just told what to do, and they're always tell the teacher and whatever. And so that's now spilling over into society itself. And the barmaid is the teacher. And so you go and tell the barmaid a naughty thing. It's fascinating what's happening. But that's what this generation like that are born in the late 90s. They're like the school softies, the school cowards, the Martin Prince types.
Well, what if it went the other way? What if you got into a bar fight? How far would you take it?
Oh no, I don't think I would. No, that's not my. No. I have never got into a bar fight.
Okay, so if it went that direction, you would de-escalate and remove yourself.
I would de-escalate. Yeah, I don't actually want to. I don't know. Well, I suppose if it was with a woke person, I suppose, because they'd be weaker than me. but if it shorter. But if it was so, then maybe. But the only time it got close to that in Finland was when I went into the roughest pub in Oulu. And I asked this person who I knew to be a complete thug, like, who's like the daddy of Oulu? Who like, can you introduce me to someone who's like in a gang? And then he did. And then this person spoke very good English, but he was obviously very aggressive and paranoid. Yeah. And I made them. But the other guy had said to me, "Oh, he doesn't speak very good English." This guy covered in tattoos, including love and hate on his knuckles. And no, stay away. That was it on his knuckles. Stay away. And I said I don't know the other guy. I said, I don't know what you were talking about with this guy's English. His English. You said his English wasn't very good. His English is very good. And I shouldn't have said that because then the other guy got really angry. What did you say about my English to the other Finn? And then got very aggressive. And I tried to intervene and say, well, I'm sorry. You shut the fuck up. And then he goes into Finnish. He's like saying to him, how dare you say my English is bad? I'm going to kill you, you know. And so these people can, you know, hair trigger temper. You've got to be careful.
Yeah, you had the front row to a Viking, like, whatever they call it.
Yeah, these were gangsters. These were seriously violent men. They're probably both dead now. Oh, and it was like shit, you know. I mean, like I've said one thing, which was just what I saw, just a casual. I was complimenting him, if anything. I was saying his English was good. Yeah, but he was like, no, this means that person said my English is bad. That's not good. No.
Well, that really brings to light. So the guy that extrapolated from what you said that all women are floozies, he went and told on you. And then, so that's one kind of culture. That's one moral framework that he would trigger because you slandered a whole group, and so he has to go tell on you. And then this other man, you challenged his honor, or you put him into a position where his honor. I made it
look like his friend had challenged his honor.
Yeah, his or competence, and then they lean right into it.
And it was then his friend had to be severely punished. And then when I tried to intervene, how dare you know. Yeah. You know, I'm in full flow. It's like interrupting the king. You know, don't you interrupt me. So I'm the daddy. Yeah,
Wow.
it was a very different moral code.
Could you
And
do a
eventually,
coffee table book of like the pubs of Finland and all of your adventures, or like
I
some
should, I should,
travel log?
I'll think all of the various people I've offended, all of the almost fights I've got
Edward
into
Dutton offends the world. And
in
then
my
you have here with
you
the
know
cherry.
my lucky escapes. I was once in this pub in a place called Carrigus near me, and it was so obviously full of heroin addicts that I was in the middle of the day. And this is a place in northern Finland, really far north on the Norwegian border. And I was like, this is just dodgy. There was it was a stabby atmosphere. And then another time, I was in this pub in a place called Loughton, which is in near Epping Forest in Essex. And I was with this friend of mine who's half English and half Japanese. And we walked in, and it was a completely white working class area. And we walked in, and I could just tell from the atmosphere, and it was because he was foreign looking, that we needed to leave. We just needed to leave. And we sat down, and there was just the look was just like, get out. And we both knew it. And so we just stood up and made a graceful retreat. He was not welcome in this pub. I mean, okay, that was 20 years ago, but it wouldn't be like that now. Yeah, in those days.
Is situational awareness like a psychological trait that you're particularly high at?
No, I would have thought it probably isn't. I would have always thought that I'm quite high on autistic traits and thus very bad at things like reading the room. So it had to be very clear, and it was very clear. And then I mean, a clearer example was on the bus with these two Norwegians, and I sort of closed my eyes. These two Norwegian friends of mine, it's about 25 years ago, and in Wimbledon, and I closed my eyes, and so I wasn't talking, so they started speaking in Norwegian, and I overheard some guy saying, "I don't think they should fucking come over here, considering what they done. Like my fucking dad would this, that, and the other," because they thought they were German.
Oh, okay.
And eventually I realized what was going on, and I just said, "Yeah, we have to get off this bus now. Stop talking. We're going to get off this bus."
You didn't go into like a discussion about the difference between Nords and Germans?
Well, I mean, first of all, the Norwegians were on the side of the Germans, or at least they were invaded by the Germans, well, that's not quite fair because there was Norwegian resistance movement. But anyway, look, it was just a stupid couple of people who were drunk, and I just thought it's probably a good idea to just leave it. You know, pick your battles.
Yeah.
But the annoying thing about that pub I told you about, when this little soy boy goes to the barmaid, is that I wasn't even being offensive. I was just logically telling them that something in evolutionary psychology, which they did ask about. So I don't know. I just don't know what you can do for these people. But
Yeah.
But anyway, I just want to emphasize: do watch Love Is Blind, the current series, because it really.
Do you know what season it is? I guess it's the current one.
The current season now.
Okay.
This season.
Will anybody like dropping in on this in 2026? We are now in 2024, so the current
2024. I don't know what the season of Love Is Blind is like in 2026. Could be rubbish.
Yeah.
They could have.
You have to realize we're time travelers here. You know, we're putting this stuff out there, and it's artifact. You know, so
they probably will do a gay Love Is Blind. They've done a Japanese Love Is Blind, and that was very interesting because it was so different from the American one. So they were all sitting there like making careful, logical notes on the suitability or otherwise of these potential partners, and all these little things that you wouldn't do on the American Love Is Blind.
Yeah, no, we shoot from the hip out here.
Yeah, they're clear. You exaggerate. It's always like in England, you'll say, "Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay." Whereas in America, it's up to level. Are you good? Yeah, I'm good. Well, good is better than okay. So I'm not just okay. I'm good. And so there's a constant exaggeration of how you feel.
We're upselling all the time.
Something that is good is awesome.
Yes.
And I don't know what something that is awesome is. It's
fucking baller.
Fucking bollocks. Yeah, it's the dogs.
Baller, not bollocks. Baller. Yeah, baller.
What does that mean? What's baller mean?
I think it has to do with testicles, but also like with like a really good sports person kind of dribbly thing.
Baller.
I think
it's baller.
Yeah,
okay.
He's a baller. Yeah.
Really, really superbly good.
You know? Yeah. Cream of the crop.
Edward
Dutton, thank you very much for your evening, and your channel is wonderful. I'm glad that you guys you're breaking out, you're opening up your production and stuff. So you got a lot of stuff coming on down the pike or pipe, whatever you guys.
Pike is a kind of weapon.
Okay, down the pike, up the pike, down the pipe. I
Pipe,
don't know.
pipe,
Yeah.
pipe.
Is there anything particularly glorious that's on the
Well, there's my
horizon?
film about Claxon. So if you want to know about sort of like the parts of England that are falling apart, then there's a film I did about Claxon,
Clacton.
Clacton, which I think is rather good if I do say so myself.
Oh, good. Is that coming out or that's out right now?
That's out. That's now.
Oh, good.
That's already on YouTube. And then there's yeah. Just go into Jolly Heretic. Just go type it into YouTube.
Yeah.
There's loads of stuff, and Twitter I'm on, of course, and Odyssey and such like. And then I live stream on Mondays at 2 p.m. New York. For your American people, 7 p.m. London. And yeah, I'm having a look at
What is this, like just a rolling kind of topical whatever's going
just
on?
whatever's going on. Plus, they send in
Yeah.
the super chats about like based science.
Based science, okay.
Yeah, the kind of
As
science that you
opposed
can't
to
look at
acidic science?
as opposed to woke science, as opposed to
Yeah.
the science that has to be filtered through, not just peer review but like queer review. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, you got to walk that based line though to stay.
You can't go, don't go too far over.
Yeah, you can't go too far. That's
Because
fine.
then there's like velociraptors and God knows what. But you just stay on
Yeah.
the sensible path.
The very edge of the Overton window.
Very edge, yeah. Not, I don't look into like ghosts or anything. Oh yes, anyway.
Okay. Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent.
That's the show. I'm going to end the
That's it, is it?
recording. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
great.